Hi Don. The new book, The Embrace of Capital, Capitalism from the Inside. Well, what's all this got to do with gay activism?
Well, it hasn't really. In a sense, my political line and my political life really has always been strung between the two issues. And so there's references to homosexuality and the gay struggle embedded in the book, but the book is really about the political left and its inability to do anything about capitalism throughout the course of my life, despite all our best efforts.
So tell me a little bit about how you became a communist.
Well, I suppose I was a communist from about 13 or 14. And my dad was the convener of shop stewards, aircraft factory in Willesden, and my mum was a cleaner, and she was a cleaner in the house. It's a very rich people in St John's Wood and Hampstead in London. So the glaring inequalities of the society were very glaring. Even as a child, it was very clear that there were the haves and the have-nots. Very sharp in London, where poorer people live quite close to very rich people, which is not usually the case in other parts of the country. And the kind of politics, the kind of leftism that I was reared up in was a Stalinist. We thought of the Soviet dictator as Uncle Joe, and he was a good man. Of course, he did very harsh things, but that's because he had to. So I was brought up in that authoritarian atmosphere, really.
So quite an early age, 13 or 14, you had communist views.
Yeah.
But when did you first realise that you were gay? Well, was that an earlier age, same age, or a bit older?
Oh, I didn't realise I was gay for a very long time, but I also fancied fellas, fancied boys, and I was very deeply conscious of that from, I suppose, early teenage years. And I had sexual experiences with lads at school. I should say that we all left school at 15 and went to work full time, so there was no thought of college or anything. The idea of fancying boys, being sexually interested in men, did not match up with the idea of being gay or homosexual.
I mean, was this because you didn't have a word for it, or?
Well, the word for it was queer, and I knew I couldn't possibly be queer. I was a communist. And communists were not queer. So I had to live. I was reared up in the midst of that contradiction, really, the complete confusion, I think.
Okay, so how did you resolve this contradiction?
Well, I didn't. I didn't. I just lived within it, really, for many years, and I never spoke about fancying lads or men at all to anybody ever. And it wasn't part of the general discourse in society at the time either, because we're talking 1960, 61, 62. There was no real discussion of the issue. It began to be discussed in the early 60s, but even there it was a film called Victim, I remember, came out.
Oh, yes.
And that was all about this posh bloke being...
Dirk Bogarde, yes.
Yeah, this posh bloke was the character who was being blackmailed. So that was the kind of context in which it came out. And the newspapers would run stories about men in the shadows.
Yeah.
that kind of...
I mean, the conflict I had was to do with religion. You know,
Right.
my parents were Roman Catholic,
Right.
and making that resolution between having gay feelings and also having to follow a religion.
Right.
It sounds a similar context, but yours was political rather than
Well, it was underpinned by Roman Catholicism too, just to be really confusing about it, because I was reared up as a Roman Catholic, and every Saturday morning I had to go to catechism classes with a marvellous nun called, she was appalling actually, but there was something marvellous about her, certainties in the world. She was called Sister Gertrude, and had a wonderful medieval headdress, and a rope belt, and big sandals. She smelled of soap, I remember. And she took me through the catechism. And so there was the authoritarianism of the Roman Catholic Church, the authoritarianism of Stalinism. It was just an unforgiving atmosphere, I think, when I think about it, that I grew up in a world surrounded by absolutely cast iron certainties. Everybody knew exactly what was going on, apparently. Obviously, it was nonsense, but people had very definite views about things. And I was reared up in that atmosphere, really.
Okay. So there must have come a time when you thought, I'm going to follow through on being a gay man, rather than following through on religious traditions or communist traditions?
No, there wasn't. That time never arrived in a strange way. And that is when I was 19, I got married to a lovely girl who I really did love, and we got on fine. And we'd been kids in the Young Communist League from 15 or 16 together. So the marriage wasn't unsuccessful in any kind of emotional sense, but it came to a head in. We got married in 1965, and it came to a head. The problems came to a head in 1971. So 6 years later, after the marriage, when I really could not go on any longer. I was beginning to have a breakdown, I think. I couldn't go on any longer fancying fellas and living this heterosexual life. So I left Sandra and immediately made arrangements to go and see a psychiatrist. That was the way I responded to it. Because until I spoke to Sandra, I'd never spoken to another person about my feelings. I had sexual experiences when I was a boy in school, but after school I never had any sexual experiences at all with men. And so that was very difficult. But before I got to see the psychiatrist, I went on the Kill the Bill demonstration against the Industrial Relations Act in London. And on that demonstration, I saw all these terrifying homosexuals who were all slapped up to the eyeballs and were distributing 2 leaflets, one which I thought was highly improbable, saying what trade unions they belonged to, and the other was an attack on psychiatry. And this leaflet that attacked psychiatry, I just thought was so wonderful. It saved my life, really.
Yeah. So that was obviously a very difficult time, and you met these young gay people who were very positive and living a different lifestyle.
Yeah.
On a demo, and were they communists as well, or?
No. They were all kinds of. I thought at the time they had completely dodgy politics. I was entirely disapproved of them politically, because of the leaflet attacking psychiatry and all that, I went back to Lancaster, where I was living at the time, and cancelled the arrangements to go and see the psychiatrist. And I suppose in the next 2 or 3 months, I came out, really over those 2 or 3 months, and discovered in the Socialist Society, because by that time I was at university, and in the Socialist Society I discovered that people I'd known for 2 or 3 years were also gay, and they'd never said anything about it either. So we realised that half the Socialist Society was gay. We discovered this quite relatively suddenly, really. So we formed an organisation. It was going to be the Gay something or other, but we didn't want to call it Liberation Front. We thought that was a bit too extreme. But within a fortnight, we decided to become extreme.
So how did you show this extreme?
Well, to start with, we called ourselves the Gay Liberation Front.
Yes.
And then we organised public meetings at the university and in the town, announcing ourselves and our existence. And this caused uproar at the time. We're talking 1971. So the comrades in the International Socialists, by this time I was no longer a Stalinist, I was a Trotskyist. And there's not really much difference between the two things, because Trotsky was a murdering bastard just like Stalin. But the leftist group I was in was called the International Socialists.
Yeah.
It was the forerunner of the Socialist Workers' Party. And the comrades there said it would be all right, me being gay, as long as I took a back seat. I always remember that. And another comrade from the Communist Party at the time, we were walking across Skirton Bridge and said, he said to me, I don't know why you don't throw yourself in the river.
So you weren't supported by your
No.
political comrades at all?
No, not really.
In regarding your sexuality?
No. And I mean, to be fair to them, I wasn't in advance of them either, you know, in my thinking. I was just as confused and backward,
Yeah.
really, as everybody was in a bit of a pickle about the issue and had not really come to terms with how to deal with it at all, I think. But for political organisations that know everything, like revolutionary Marxist groups who do definitely know everything, right? It's a bit of, they were a bit confused when they suddenly encountered the gay question and the whole difficulty of homosexuality. They didn't know quite what to do about that, because their instincts were liberal in the sense of they didn't want to beat up queers or anything like that, but on the other hand, they thought we should take a back seat.
Right. And what was the terminology at the time? I mean, was it homosexual, queer, or gay? Do you remember?
I think it was queer usually.
Yeah.
Queer as a 9-bob note, as they used to say.
Yeah.
When I was a lad. So I had to confront the fact, and the way I did actually think about it like this at the time, and that is that in a way I had to accept that I was a queer before I could become gay, if you see what I mean. That belonging to this, publicly and openly belonging to this despised group, social group, was necessary to accept that you were part of this despised group, to associate yourself with it, was a kind of necessary thing.
How did you develop to become positive about those feelings, or was it very negative?
No, I felt very positive about it. When I say, you know, I had to belong to this despised group, it was kind of, I mustn't try and distance myself from them.
Mm.
I must actually openly belong to this group of queers, right, in order to be proud and out and all that.
Right. So
I always remember a really irritating lesbian who came from London. We were at this meeting in the early days, and she really pissed us off by being so militant and all the rest of it. And she was sitting in this meeting in West Road, and she was thumping the table, and she said, "We've got to say we're proud and we're angry and all the rest of it." And then promptly the chair collapsed under her, which was a great relief to the rest of us. We all fell about laughing. But actually, she was right, really. I think it was that recognition that she was right that was really important about being proud and angry and all the rest of it.
yeah, but the way you developed your understanding, was it because of, like, you know, the black movement, the women's movement, or was it because of politics? Was it because of communism? How did you develop your understanding about being gay?
I think it was, I had this, and I wrote a pamphlet that was published in 1973, I think, and it was called The Politics of Homosexuality, where I developed with great confidence a completely mad theory that you couldn't have gay liberation unless capitalism was overthrown. Right. And I've been proved absolutely wrong, of course, with every decade that's passed.
Yeah.
That was the idea. The idea was that capitalism was the source of all oppressions, racism, sexism, you know, and consequently you had to get rid of capitalism in order to be emancipated. And of course this was not an opinion shared by most people in the gay movement. Most people in the gay movement had not been Stalinists, they were not communists, they were not members of leftist groups. So their outlook was much more libertarian and anarchic, really. And they obviously took a very dim view of what I would have called at the time class politics. It's not that they were against the working class as figured in that way. It's that they just believe in emancipating everybody. Right.
Yeah. So, did you become involved in single issue campaigns?
Well, the only single issue campaign I became involved in was the gay movement, really. And that was an immense problem because I arrived in Bradford in '73, I think, and from Lancaster, and I was immediately called by the International Socialist Branch Committee to a meeting. I got to the comrades' flat, and they were sitting in the kitchen, three of them behind a table, with one chair in front of the table for me to sit upon. So it was a trial.
Wow.
Right? And they took the view that that struggling for gay liberation was not a priority for the party, and that I should work in the textile fraction. What that meant was handing out leaflets and selling papers outside textile mills and so on in the area. So it was clear that I wasn't going to stop doing gay work, right? So we effectively parted company. But it was very interesting, this form of this trial. These were Trotskyites, but they were behaving just like the Stalinists I'd grown up with. So there was an authoritarian line that you...
I think I'd have thrown the towel in there and then, but you carried on.
Yes, I think so, because I did think that I didn't think that you could overturn the whole tradition of the socialist or communist movement in relation to class politics and the working class, the way we thought about it at the time. I didn't think you could throw that out and just get rid of it with single issues, you know, like women's rights or gay rights, whatever. There was some connection between all these struggles. What the connection between capitalism and lesbianism was, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you now, never mind then. But somehow there was an assumption that the way society was organised was had something to do with us. And in fact, subsequently I developed a theory where that is the case, but not in quite the way I would have figured it at the time. At the time, I just thought in very conventional leftist terms. The collision between the left and the right was, in my experience, was really shocking, in the sense of I remember most visiting the collective of gay men who lived entirely in drag. They were called Bethnal Rouge, and they lived in an old shop front in Bethnal Green. And they'd given up all their individual clothes, so they just went to a dressing up bag every morning, a big black sacks, and chose what they were to wear for that day. Anyway, they were very patronising but very nice to me. They thought I was an object of great interest, this rather straight looking and sounding leftist man. Right? So I used to go to tea with them, and I used to enjoy going to tea with them, but it was a complete collision of worlds, if you see what I mean. It's very funny. But yeah, so there was a sense in which there was a very high level of incommunication, of people simply not understanding each other.
Well, first up, best dressed, isn't it?
That's right. But that collision between the kind of culture of the left at the time, of what might be called the straight left at the time, and the Gay Liberation Front was considerable. Because, as I say, the Gay Liberation Front was full of very liberal kind of libertarian sentiment, really. You know, it strayed into anarchism at its extreme, but basically it wasn't anarchist either. It was just very open, liberal, and caring.
I mean, the main aim, wasn't it, was to come out.
That's right.
Encourage people to come out to try and spread awareness.
Right. That's right. But there was I can remember there was an element of intolerance as well, in that of what used to be called the straight gay scene, right? Of conventional gay men, conventional gay women, lesbians. There was a certain antagonism towards that, even amongst these libertarian gay radicals, for want of a better phrase. So there was a kind of intolerance towards the conventions of the gay scene, I think. But that was the only point at which the gay liberation seemed to me to be intolerant of anything. And consequently, the kind of rubric of the working class and the oppression, the Tories, all that kind of thing, it wasn't really resonant. So the gay movement only became really anti-Tory in a kind of self-conscious way with the miners' strike and with Thatcher. Once Thatcher came in, then there was an understanding, a political understanding, a hatred of the Tories. But apart from that kind of led the gay movement into a kind of reformist kind of politics, so a kind of politics to do with the Labour Party and getting the law changed and all those kinds of things, equal rights and so on, which gay liberation had sort of been about, but actually wasn't. Gay liberation was, I related to it in a more utopian way, that we were going to overthrow everything. And we were going to be free.
I mean, Thatcher's most famous, wasn't she, for the pretend family relationships and Section 28?
That's right.
And you were involved in that campaign?
Yeah, certainly. I was involved in that campaign. I was also involved in campaigns around AIDS and so on. The idea that we were going to become completely legally free, that we were going to actually get equality, never entered my head until much later on. Because, of course, by the beginning of this century, we had got once equal marriage came in, then we had completely equal rights, and this was something that I'd always argued from the early 70s couldn't possibly happen under capitalism. And so that's what lies behind this book, really, in the sense of the way those of us on the left and the far left have kind of always misunderstood capitalism. We haven't really grasped how it really is a hall of mirrors. It's capable of all kinds of changes that we would never anticipate.
Yeah. I never believed that gay people could get married.
Yeah.
And even now in my mindset, you hear somebody's got married and you think, you know, it's to opposite sex. You know, sometimes you just don't understand it. It takes a while.
I remember this happening to me when I was lecturing at Manchester Metropolitan University some years ago. This student said, must have been about 10, 12 years ago. This student said to me, "Oh, I've just seen your husband," and I took a double take, because he'd just seen Gary, who was my husband at the time, and being astonished that the lad had said husband.
Yes.
And I'd never said the word husband. I'd never thought of Gary as my husband before. And this youngster, this 18, 19-year-old lad who was a student, had just said it naturally.
Yeah.
And I realised then that these changes were extraordinary that were occurring in the society, which I hadn't really grasped at all, which is interesting, because if you're a Marxist and a revolutionary, you do know everything. Right? And that's what this book is really about, is about trying to unravel this world in which we knew everything, when manifestly we don't understand the nature of the system at all, or how it works. And I think that it's a wonder, the whole emancipation of, the legal emancipation of homosexuals over our lifetime, from say the mid-60s through to the Equal Marriage Act, is a metaphor for how the radical left doesn't really understand the society, you know, because we didn't understand it when it was happening.
Yeah, and the legal changes have made attitude changes so much, haven't they?
Right. Well, and that's why it suddenly developed developed over the years, this understanding that what was happening was the collapse of heavy industry. Once heavy industry collapsed and deindustrialization started to take over, then the whole way in which people worked, people went to work. You know, because when I was a lad, there were typing pools. And I can remember arguing with somebody. I said, if all those women would sit in serried ranks behind their typewriters, I said, if you swap the typewriter for a sewing machine, you would know what was going on there. Right? And that kind of world in which everybody did the same thing in big rooms, in factories, offices, wherever, in serried ranks. The trade unions were like that as well. In that world, difference was regarded as dysfunctional. It was a nuisance, it was a problem. You couldn't have difference. Everybody had to be the same in some fundamental sense. Yeah. And it seemed to me that the breakup of that world, where slowly but surely the employers began to realise that difference was perfectly congenial with the bottom line. Difference wasn't dysfunctional. On the contrary, lots of different people having different attitudes, different opinions, and so on, could be quite productive. So I think that the huge changes that were going on underneath the surface of the society, in terms of the way people worked, the way industry worked, the change of technology, and of course the changing in the ethnic composition of the working class. You know, it was no longer just white. There were lots of people from the Caribbean, and then loads of people from South Asia came, and then the South Asians from East Africa came, and the whole population was beginning to become more varied as well. So I think that these changes are really important in terms of homosexuality being accepted as part of the general mix in the society.